Have you ever stopped to think, why would God allow Satan to talk directly to him? Yes, this happens early in the book of Job, one of the most mysterious scenes in the Bible. The adversary, the one who personifies the opposition to good, presents himself before the throne of God and has a direct dialogue with the Creator of all things. But how is this possible? And even more curious, why? This meeting leads us to one of the deepest debates of the Christian faith, human suffering and sovereignty of God. The book of Job does not start with a tragedy. He begins with a meeting in heaven. It is there, in this seemingly inaccessible scenario, that a conversation happens, and the fate of a righteous man is placed at stake. God asks Satan, "Did you observe my servant Job? For no one is on earth similar to him, a righteous and straight man, fear of God, and who deviates from evil." Job 1:8. And Satan responds boldly, implying that Job's faith only exists because of the blessings God grants him. And then the unexpected happens. God allows Satan to touch Job's life. But that raises many questions. If God is sovereign, why grant this freedom to a being like Satan? If he knows Job's heart, why allow him to suffer? Does this story reveal more about our spiritual world than we can see? The answer may be hidden in a little commented verse, or perhaps in the way we understand what true faith is. What is at stake here is not just the life of a man. It is the value of human faithfulness in the face of suffering, the complexity of evil, and the mysteries of God's righteousness. Get ready, because in the next few minutes we will dive and find out why God allowed this meeting. The answer can change the way you see suffering, faith, and God himself. Job's book is one of the oldest in the Bible. He not only tells us a story about suffering, but leads us directly to the heart of one of the greatest spiritual tensions ever recorded, the dialogue between God and Satan. To understand the impact of this moment, we need to understand who Job was. As written in Job, chapter 1, verse 1, "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and this was a righteous and straight man, fear of God, and who deviated from evil." Job was not just a good man, he was exemplary. His righteousness was recognized not only by those around him, but by God himself. He was a prosperous man, with a large family, great flock, and above all, an unshakable faith. The text presents us with an idyllic scenario, until something extraordinary happens. In the following verses, we are taken to a scene that takes place in the advice from God. See what Job says? Chapter 1, verse 6. "And a day when the children of God came to present themselves before the Lord, Satan also came among them." This phrase already makes us perplexed. Who are these children of God, and why is Satan in their midst? The children of God are, according to most scholars, heavenly beings, also called angels, who present themselves before the throne of God. This kind of advice from God also appears in other excerpts from Scripture, as in 1 Kings 22, 19-23 and Psalm 89:7. It is a language that shows God as sovereign king receiving reports or allowing debates among spiritual beings. But the most surprising thing is that Satan appears in this meeting. Here, the Hebrew word used is ha-satat, which means the accuser or the opponent. It does not emerge as a banned or rebellious being out of God's reach, but as someone who still has access to this advice, perhaps in a function of inspector or opponent, according to the context of the Old Testament. God begins the conversation and mentions Job proudly as a father who presents the character of his son. But Satan responds with cynicism, suggesting that Job's faith is self-employed. "Do you fear Job to God in a bucket?" Job 1:9. He states that Job is only faithful because everything goes well and proposes a test. And then, what shocks most? God allows. This permission is not a sign of God's weakness, but of a deeper purpose. It is as if God said, Do you want to see what true faith is? I allow, but with limits. Thus begins Job's journey. It is essential to remember that at that time, culture understood that suffering was a direct consequence of sin. That is, if someone suffered, it was because he had done something wrong. But Job's story breaks this paradigm. Job suffers, even being fair. This cultural background makes the book even more revolutionary. Not only does it show that the righteous can suffer, but reveals that suffering can have a higher purpose, often incomprehensible to our human eyes. The big question that hangs in the air is, why did God allow Satan to talk to him? Moreover, why did it adhere to the opponent and allow him to touch the life of a righteous man like Job? For some, this scene is disconcerting. We are used to imagining a purely holy sky, separated from any evil presence. And in fact, God's holiness is absolute. However, the book of Job introduces us to a moment where evil enters the throne room, not to win, but to be limited and, in a way, used to fulfill a purpose of God. There are several theological interpretations of this scene, and each sheds light on distinct aspects of God's faith and character. 1. Dialogue as a test of true faith. One of the most accepted readings is that God allows conversation because he wants to demonstrate that Job's faith is true, not dependent on blessings, but rooted in love and reverence for God. Satan's question, "Do you fear Job?" to the God of Bucket? It's a challenge to the idea of genuine worship. It's like he said, take everything from him and see if he still loves you. God accepts the challenge not because he doubts Job, but because he fully trusts him. God is actually presenting Job as an example of authentic faith. 2. The mystery of God's sovereignty. Other scholars point to the fact that nothing happens without God's consent. Even the opponent only acts within the limits that God imposes. This is critical. Satan has no autonomous authority. It is contained, limited, even used as an instrument for a greater purpose. According to Isaiah 45:7, God declares, I form the light and create the darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, I do all these things. This verse does not say that God is the origin of moral evil, but that he rules up to chaos, using him to fulfill his designs. In this context, allowing Satan's speech does not diminish God's holiness, rather reveals absolute rule even over evil. 3. A mirror of spiritual reality. There are also those who see this episode as a reflection of the spirit world that we do not see. Job's book gives us a kind of glimpse of what happens behind the scenes of reality. It shows that there is an ongoing conflict, and that our lives can be part of a much larger narrative than we think. 4. An intentional puzzle. Finally, some theologians claim that this kind of narrative is purposely involved in mystery. Job's book, not offering easy answers, invites us to reflect on the kind of relationship we have with God. Do we seek God for what he gives or whom he is? God allows Satan's speech because he wants a deep truth to come to light. True faith resists even when everything collapses. This is the essence of the book of Job, and perhaps our own spiritual journey. It is not a question of understanding everything, but of trusting even without understanding. Job's story is more than an ancient narrative. It is a mirror for our own journey of faith. How many times have we asked, why am I going through this if I have tried to be faithful to God? This is essentially the question of Job, and often it is ours. Job was righteous, straight, fear of God, and yet he lost everything. Family, health, possessions. What the book of Job teaches us is that faithfulness to God does not exempt us from pain, but sustains us through it. By allowing Satan to talk to him, God also allowed Job to be proved. But note, God has not abandoned Job at any time. He was there, silent maybe, but present. And here is a difficult but liberating truth. Not all God's silence is absence. Sometimes heaven is silent because it is preparing something we will not understand now, but will be revealed later. Does God also leave puzzles in our lives for a reason? Perhaps. Perhaps there are trials that we will never fully understand, but which strengthen our character, purify our faith, and reveal who we really are in the face of chaos. See what 1 Peter says, chapter 1, verse 7, that the proof of your faith, more precious than the gold that perishes and is proved by fire, finds yourself in praise, honor, and glory in the revelation of Jesus Christ. This passage connects directly to Job's experience. His faith was proven in the fire, and in the end, even without having all the answers, he says, "With the ears I had heard of you, but now you see you my eyes." Job 42:5. That is, Job was transformed from pain, not because he understood everything, but because he knew God in a deeper way. This story challenges us. Do we seek God only when everything goes well? Would our faith resist if our blessings were taken? Do we rely more on God's gifts than in your presence? The conversation between God and Satan recorded in Job is not just about Job. It's about us, about the faith we profess, about how we react when everything collapses, about trusting God even when He looks silent. And when life seems incomprehensible, remember, God is in control even when evil manifests Himself. He is not the author of evil, but He is the Lord over all things. It defines the limits. It transforms pain into maturity and suffering into wisdom. Perhaps you are living your own version of Job's chapter 1, but believe me, chapter 42 also comes. Job's story confronts us, thrills and transforms. She shows us that yes, God allowed Satan to talk to him, but it was not by chance. It was to reveal to the world and to heaven that true faith exists, and that there are men and women who love God not for what He gives, but by whom He is. Job lost everything, questioned, cried, but in the end he did not abandon his faith. And God restored him, not only in goods but in understanding, in communion and in honor. And the Lord became the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends, and the Lord added twice to all that Job before he had. Job, chapter 42, verse 10. This story reminds us that God is not afraid of our questions. It allows pain to visit us, not to destroy us, but to cut us. Maybe today you are like Job, surrounded by loss, questions, and silences, but even if the enemy is accusing, God is watching, limiting, sustaining, and at the right time, restoring. The initial question continues to echo. Why did God allow Satan to talk to him? Because he trusted Job's faith, and who knows, he also trusts yours. Have you ever wondered if your current struggle is actually proof of God that your faith is more precious than gold? Is God using silence and pain to reveal you something that can only be learned in darkness? If this message touched you, like this video. This helps other people find that they are not alone in their spiritual battles. Comment down here. What part of Job's story most spoke to you? Have you ever lived something like? Your testimony can bless lives, and remember, the same God who has allowed proof. It is the God who prepares the reward. You are not alone. Your faith is being seen, and the final chapter has not yet been written.